Hey everyone, welcome back. Over the last couple of years, the Supreme Court has become a much more visible part of our everyday lives. Decisions like the overturning of Roe v. Wade, as well as the recent financial disclosure scandals regarding Justice Clarence Thomas, have caused a lot more people to pay attention to this branch of government that they otherwise might have ignored. And with that attention has come a healthy dose of criticism, with some people going so far as to call the Supreme Court illegitimate. Now, you guys know me, I like to be very careful with my words, and when I see people calling the Supreme Court illegitimate, it worries me because a lot of people out there are trying to use the term illegitimate to not only discredit people, but entire institutions of our democracy in a broader attempt to destabilize our governmental systems. So, when I look at people calling the current Supreme Court illegitimate, what I think they're actually trying to say is that the Supreme Court is suffering from a crisis of credibility rather than legitimacy. So, what's the difference between the two? Well, in the context of government, when we say an organization is legitimate, we mean three things. Number one, the organization is established by some sort of law. Number two, that all members of that organization are appointed or otherwise employed in accordance with that law. And number three, that that agency or organization is operating within the scope of its legally designated authority. So, let's look at the Supreme Court. It is established by Article 3 of the Constitution, and the number of justices are prescribed by U.S. law, and the court is currently in accordance with that. Additionally, all 9 members have been appointed by a president and confirmed by the Senate. So, as long as they are operating as the court, making rulings about their interpretation of the Constitution, and utilizing the authority given to them under Marbury v. Madison for judicial review, the court is legitimate, whether we agree with it or disagree with it. While an organization's legitimacy is tied to the letter of the law, its credibility is more closely aligned with the spirit of the law. In the case of the Supreme Court, we might look at things like, are they being an impartial arbiter? Are they using the power of judicial review to protect the rights and freedoms of the American citizen? And are they being a fair and co-equal branch of government that tries its best to remove itself from politics and to make the best legal decisions possible regarding the cases brought before it? And in this area, I think that there are plenty of arguments to say that the court, as currently constituted, is not credible. I think that there are 2 main arguments that I think are the strongest. The first focuses on the overturning of Roe v. Wade. During their Senate confirmation hearings, all 3 of the justices nominated by former President Donald Trump declared that Roe v. Wade was settled case law. And when a justice says that, it means that they will not overturn it, as generally speaking, the Supreme Court operates under the principle of stare decisis, or let the decision stand. Now, that doesn't mean that a case can never be overturned, but generally speaking, when a case establishes a right, it means that there needs to be a ton of evidence to suggest that the original decision was wrong, and we did not see that in the Dobbs decision. What we did see was a very calculated political move driven by appointments based on Federalist Society beliefs and, generally speaking, Republican political ideology. And that had negative consequences both for the Republicans electorally, but also for the credibility of the court. A lot of people at the time accused all 3 of Trump's nominees of perjury, essentially going in and lying before Congress. Now, this does not make the court illegitimate, as none of those justices have been impeached and removed, so the court remains legitimate, but certainly there are some credibility issues when it comes to the apolitical nature of the justices. The second issue the court is facing with regards to its credibility is the financial disclosure scandal around Justice Clarence Thomas. Now, it's bad enough that the justice has been receiving a lot of expensive vacations and other benefits from a wealthy conservative activist who has a bit too much Hitler memorabilia for my taste, but I think the thing that's doing more damage to the Supreme Court's credibility here is Chief Justice John Roberts' refusal to have any sort of investigation or oversight into this matter. Now, for other federal judges, these financial disclosures and other ethical and professional requirements are mandatory, but the laws that govern the Supreme Court make them essentially optional. And some of this ties back to the separation of branches and checks and balances system, which I understand. And I get the Chief Justice's position that he doesn't want his justices being hauled in front of congressional committees every time Congress is upset with the Supreme Court. I get that. However, in this particular case where we're looking at something that on the surface seems very corrupt, I think that this is one of those situations where a little bit of light on the subject might help the court make it through this scandal and keep its credibility intact, as otherwise it appears, at least to the average person, that this conservative activist is essentially bribing Justice Clarence Thomas. Now, I'm not alleging that that is the case, and quite frankly, given all of Clarence Thomas's writings throughout his life, I don't actually think any of this money would have changed any of his decisions. They're pretty in line with his beliefs. But, again, it's that appearance that this justice is flouting the law that really impacts the credibility of the court, to the point where, again, I understand why people are calling it illegitimate. It certainly looks, on its surface, to be corrupt. But again, until something goes through the House and the Senate in a formal impeachment process, the court remains legitimately constituted, even though it is definitely continuing to lose credibility. So, why is this distinction important? Well, at the beginning of the Trump administration and carrying on to the present day, we have seen a lot of conservatives and far-right extremists attack essentially any part of the government they don't like as illegitimate. And this strategy is designed to undermine and eventually destroy some of the most important pillars of our democratic system. And we saw this culminate in their attacks on the 2020 election. So, if we want to say that something in government is illegitimate, we have to be very certain of our facts and be able to prove that there is some violation between how an agency is operating and what authority the law provides for how it should be constituted, how its members should be hired, and what authority that institution might have. And for the current Supreme Court, while I certainly disagree with a lot of its decisions, there is no evidence to show that it is improperly constituted at the current moment, and none of the justices have been impeached and are then refusing to leave their posts. So, the current court is legitimate. However, given all of the scandals that are surrounding it and their refusal to submit to even the most basic forms of oversight, there is definitely a crisis of credibility at the Supreme Court. And the longer it goes on, and the more justices seem to stray away from the spirit of the mission that was established for the Supreme Court, I think that we're going to continue to see people's faith in the Supreme Court continue to erode. Think about it.